So just to restart, my name is Madhur Katuria, and I'm going to be your co-host for our session on using Agile Principles for IT Service Management. Now, in case you have any questions, and we'll set up a few rules before we go forward. In case you have any questions for me, please raise it through the questions bar on the right-hand side of your login window. And I'm going to be answering them as we go along or in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. I will not be working directly on the chat window, so please please feel to raise the questions to the questions menu on the right hand side of your login screen. So now let's get started and talk about this very important topic, which is how do we work with Agile practices and Agile principles in a service management kind of industry. So I'm going to be a little closer to my computer so that because Subodh just now mentioned the voice is echoing, so I'll try to make it on speak as slow as possible. So let's talk about the agenda for our webinar. Now the agenda is kind of very open, but I'm going to be talking about a few topics on how Agile philosophy in general and different frameworks that we have within under the Agile philosophy can apply to a service industry which is already very dynamic, very collaborative, and very customer centric. Do we even need some of these Agile practices as a specific use in the Agile service management industry or IT service management industry, and also in governance, not just the delivery but also in governance. Okay. So, what is ITSM really? First, let's talk about that. Now, ITSM is really a confusing term, if you'd like to say. IT service management has been used both for IT governance, it has been used for service delivery, and it has been also used for service discovery. It really is a combination of all of these things: discovering the services which you need to provide to your customer, then actually delivering them successfully, and then also focusing on governance of these services. Now, the means of delivery could be various. It could be voice-based, it could be web-based, and also it could be as simple as a physical service delivery. But in general, it typically involves a relationship both in a short term and a long term directly between a customer and an associate, which may be focused on resolving a particular product, resolving a particular problem that the customer is facing, maybe selling them a certain product or providing them solution to a certain challenge or certain specific work that they want to do. It may be as simple as we want to assign a computer or we want to order a new computer, to as complex as I need to reinstall the operating system on my PC. And this has been both used in KPO as well as the BPO industry as a back office management framework, where various customers and clients, they would hire people and hire associates maybe 7,000 miles away to deliver a particular service to their end users. And that's why, in fact, we talk about the Indian economy, and now more and more of Southeast Asia, it has been focused on service delivery and service management and governance. So there have been various frameworks which probably a lot of you already know about, which have been a part of this, right from ITIL, the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, COBIT, which is more towards governance, then focusing on other lesser known frameworks which are towards operation, which are towards information services, and then even KPO and knowledge processing services. But the question that we are trying to talk about here is, how do we manage these in an agile world? Or even before that, do we really need to agile in this world? So typical questions that I am faced with whenever I start talking about agility and agile frameworks to some of my colleagues and the practitioners. So the first question and the foremost probably, which you are all of you are also getting, can we really apply agile to service management? And the primary reason for that being, service management is already very customer collaborative and customer intensive work. So what do we really need to change? And if we really take up Agile because my organization wants to go Agile as a standard way of working, how will going Agile help us? Or is Agile equal to Scrum? So let's try to answer some of those questions as we go along. First, why is the need for agility in ITSM? Because traditionally ITL frameworks and COBIT is more process oriented, which focuses on to get the right process so that you can deliver a particular service quality to your customers. But let's talk about a few challenges which most of the service delivery teams face when they are working on a particular service or with a particular customer. The first and foremost, and I'm sure a lot of us would align it here, is the workflow management, because sometimes you would have 1,000 tickets in a day, and on other days probably 1 to 2 tickets in a particular week. So how do you balance the workload? Sometimes one particular associate or one particular team member gets very overloaded because of multiple calls to handle, multiple customers to handle. And on other days, one person is not even handling, or maybe two people are handling the same customer. So how do we balance this workload across different cycles? The second part is when every day, day over day, you have to face the customers, you have to focus on how do we work with them. So getting the customer focus and not focusing on the process becomes that much more difficult. And if you don't understand the business clearly, if you don't understand the value that your business, your product or your service brings to the customers, or what is the risk involved for the customers, it may become that much more difficult for the associates and the team members to continuously maintain that customer focus. The third part is ownership. Because now one of the Agile principles, if some of you have studied that and some of you because you have been part of my CSM classes, one of the key Agile principles we have talked about is a collective ownership, where everyone owns the service, everyone owns the solution, everyone owns the software. But here, in a service management world, in a help desk kind of environment, any ticket is almost owned by everyone, right? But then if everyone owns the ticket, how do we ensure the delivery is complete and smooth and it does not slip between the cracks, right? So whom do we fix the accountability on? To the associate or the team member who first attended the customer's call, or to the one who really closed it at the end? So ownership also comes into picture here. And at the same time, because of the pressures, because of the focus from the customers and market, it is not just enough to maintain the same service levels. Right from the customers to the executive management to the team leads themselves, they are looking for continuous improvement on the performance matrices. So how do we really achieve that? And that's where I talk about agility, because agility is not just about daily stand-ups. It's not just about sprints. It's not just about focusing on software delivery, but it has three key aspects. Some of you are already aware of it, but for the benefit of everyone, let me quickly repeat it here. So, principles and values, which are basically the foundation of Agile philosophy, they form the essence of it. Now the practices or rituals, they can be chosen as per your project, as per your team, as per your organization's needs. And then there are a lot of myths which are associated with it. For example, let me just now talk about it. Agile is only about software delivery. Agile is only about no documentation. Agility means no process. So these are some of the myths which have, as the Agile movement has grown, have got associated with the Agile Manifesto. So when we talk about this, let's first focus on the principles and values. And when we talk about those principles and values, we always come across first as the Agile Manifesto. Okay, so let's first talk about that. So typical manifesto is what I want to talk about now. So this is something probably all of us are aware of, but let me quickly talk about it. We are uncovering better ways of developing software, and we are doing it and helping others to do it. And through this, we have come to value the tenet number 1 for Agile practices is individuals and interactions matter more over process and tools. And I'm sure you would remember the second one also, which is a working software matters more over comprehensive documentation. The third one would be customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And last but not the least, which is very, very true for the service management world, is responding to change is more important over following a plan. Okay, but here is a problem. When we talk about the Agile Manifesto in its true form, it sounds more like product development. So if I'm a service engineer, if I'm a service associate, what is in it for me? What do I have to do with software development? So let's try to do something different while we are in this webinar. Let's try to tweak the Agile Manifesto to focus on service management. So what are the changes we would need to bring in if you want to talk about service management? So here is what I try to do, a little trick, and do let me know by raising your hand if you can really spot the difference that I brought about on the first tenet of the manifesto. So I'd like to quickly see if you can tell me or raise your hand if you already see the change that I have brought about in the Agile Manifesto already. Raise your hand. Okay, I'll wait for 30 seconds then. Yes, I can see few hands there already. Okay, so yes, I can see a few hands. Good. So now let's, so the change that I brought about was we are uncovering better ways of delivering a service by doing it themselves and helping others do it. And through this, what we have come to value is that individuals and interactions matter more over process and tools. When a customer is live with you, when the customer needs something, they are not really looking for the process and what process you are following. All they are interested in how you can solve their problem or their query. Now let's talk about the second manifesto or the second part of the manifesto. So the change that we talk about here, because typically the Agile Manifesto talks about a working software, but we from the service industry, service management are not really delivering a software every time, but we are working on solutions, right from being able to install an application to not being able to reboot their system and so on and so forth. Or as simple as I want to order a notepad. So this is about providing a working solution rather than focusing on comprehensive documentation, right? So yes, that's what the customers will look from us. How soon can you provide them something which will solve their problem or a query? Then typically what I have seen, and let's say when I call an IVR or a call center, what I always have got is, oh, please tell me about, don't tell me about the rules and so on, just tell me if you can solve me. So customers are looking for someone or associate or a team member who can collaborate with them, who can tell them, who can solve their problem in real time. Okay, so here customer collaboration is important, because if you're not talking about customer collaboration, that's where the prime focus of service management industry is. So, and that's where you go away from service delivery and service management. So customer collaboration is more important rather than just repeating the rules and procedures again and again to your customer. They will simply not understand it, or after a couple of tries they will simply be fed up with that. So work with them, try to understand the risk they are facing, try to understand the challenge they are facing, and try to solve it. Now the last part of the manifesto remains absolutely the same, right? Responding to change is more important over following a plan. And so do the values that agility talks about: trust, collaboration, accountability, high performance, high aims, self-organization, sustainable pace. So the values also remain the same. Okay. Now, Neetu has a question here which I would like to answer. So Neetu asks how process and tools are different from repeating rules and principles. So let me quickly go back to the previous slide where we talked about the Agile Manifesto. Now, in the Agile Manifesto for service management, what I said was whenever customer logs in a request or a ticket, for them, they are looking for someone who can really collaborate with them to solve their problem, and someone who tells them, oh no, no ma'am, this is as per the rules. We cannot give you something. So they are not really looking for that answer because they are probably not done ready. Okay. And where do these rules and procedures come from? The typical processes that we already have in place. Or you have to first log in a request to IVR option 1, then go to option 2, and then they transfer you over to desk number 3. They are not looking for that. They are looking for an instant solution. So that's how the process and tools differ from repeating rules and procedures. Now, all this may sound okay. So we are all this may sound okay, but what are the practices that we can really use in day-to-day life, in day-to-day work life, which will help us use the Agile philosophy and Agile principles in service management? So let's now quickly go to that. So first of all, the question that I want to answer here is Scrum enough? Because typically it has been known, or most of the industry now believes Agile is equal to Scrum, but no. Agility is way beyond just Scrum. Agility is a set of principles and values which govern everything that we can work on. Okay? So even though you may not be using Scrum, you can still be Agile. And you may be using all the practices of Scrum, but you may still not be Agile. So this is something that you would have to focus on. Because when we talk about Scrum, Scrum would work very well when you have a relatively stable backlog, and it has always been in most companies, most organizations, it has always been said that at least 2 weeks of iteration, 2 weeks of sprint is a good enough sprint. And yes, you can use Scrum for distributed teams also with a few tweaks obviously. But what if your priorities change every day? What if not just every day, every hour you have 3 different priorities? So in that scenario, Scrum falls short. The reason being was it insists or it talks about that within a given week at least, the sprint backlog that you are taking or the number of backlog items you are taking in that given sprint should not change or should not undergo a very big change. But in a typical service delivery industry, you probably get, if not hundreds and thousands, at least 10 to 15 tickets every day which you have to resolve. Some with short SLAs like 2 to 4 hours, and some with large SLAs like maybe 48 hours or 7 to 2 hours. So in this kind of environment, Scrum may not be enough. So what we need to do is a mix of Scrum, Kanban, and the new framework that we have developed, which is the Battlefield Agility, to devise your own customized framework for service management. So now I'm going to talk about how we can pick up practices and pick up parts of some of these methodologies which can actually help us in service management and service delivery. So first let's talk about Scrum. Sorry about that, we ran forward. The first thing that you need is small cycles of work. So rather than having 2-week, 3-week or 4-week sprints, in a typical service delivery environment, you would focus on small cycles or small sprints. And now because we are talking about smaller sprints and frequent changes, the focus is not on the sprint planning and sprint review as much, but rather on daily stand-ups where you plan your day. So I have repeated in many of my classes and in conferences, but I repeat it again. Your daily stand-up meeting is not a status meeting. It is actually a daily planning meeting where you plan your day. And for any service delivery team, planning their day is very important. On maybe we have a customer who just went for a release, so do expect more tickets from them. Okay. So, so we should probably focus on the daily stand-ups more and how to strategize for the day. Sprint planning meeting and the sprint review meeting, those still are important because they will help you devise the strategy for that week probably. Okay. So focus on daily stand-ups while using sprint planning and sprint review for more strategizing. Also, because when we are into a service delivery, your tickets are focused on your associates, your team members are more focused on closing the tickets as soon as possible. So the review does not really have to be very formal. So it can be more of an informal review where we talk about how do we, how did we do, what are the things that we really focused, and if there are any common items or common patterns as a team member you want to point out that for all the tickets we are seeing this common pattern. Maybe we need to escalate this or we need to upgrade this. Now I'm trying to answer a question from Suresh who joins us from Capgemini, Netherlands, that in case a single team has to do both product development and service management, how do we do that? So Suresh, I'm going to be answering that question in probably a couple of slides from now. And Neetu has a question because I talked about sprint planning being more like a strategy meeting. So can we do it on a need basis? Now, when we talk about sprint planning and when we talk about sprint, so Scrum essentially means we need to follow a certain discipline, a certain rhythm. So that means if you are using the concept of sprints, if you are using the concept of Scrum, my recommendation would be to use all the tenets. So sprint planning meetings should still happen. Maybe it may be not more than 20 minutes to half an hour. You don't need to really spend a couple of hours on the sprint planning meeting. And the next question, in fact, which Neetu has, again due to the Scrum ceremonies is, can we really combine then the sprint review and retrospective? Now the review, as I said, could be more informal, which is more focused on what all did we deliver, or there are any common patterns that you can have. So from that perspective, if you can, if you want to hold them back to back, or maybe spend, call a meeting, maybe first 20 minutes you spend on sprint review, and the next set of minutes on sprint retrospective, that may be possible, but with one change. Typically, when we talk about sprint review, it is not just the Scrum team, not just the team members who participate, but also the stakeholders. Okay. So when we are doing review, it is okay if they are present, but during the retrospective, if the other stakeholders are present beyond the team which is committed to that service delivery, the team members might feel uncomfortable. So you have to think from that perspective, how would you balance it out, or we ask your stakeholders. Now we have completed with the review, can we start with the retrospective where we would need some privacy? Okay. So that's how you would tweak your sprint review meetings and sprint planning meetings. Now Sachin asked me a question that when we are receiving tickets and alerts which are dynamic, how do we plan for those? So we can't really plan for those, Sachin. But we can put them into different buckets, and this is something that shortly I'm going to be talking about. And the question which Kaveen asked is, because we don't really have a sprint backlog, because the environment is very dynamic, how can we talk about sprint planning? So sprint planning meeting, as I said, could be a very short meeting which is more focused on strategizing. Okay, so these two customers have gone live, so we can expect more set of requirements or more set of tickets from there. Or because we are going to be observing a downtime on a particular server, so make sure this is informed to all the associates. Or because a couple of associates are not going to be present during this week, so we need to handle some extra workload of codes. So those kind of things you can focus on during your sprint planning meeting. So, but now coming to the question which confuses the most, and I already have received a lot of questions around that part. Okay, how do we plan a weekly sprint, and what do we do with sprint? So that's exactly the question that I am trying to talk about. That you need to segregate your planned and unplanned work. So whenever you have, let's say, a time period of 1 week, and maybe you have 5 team members, which brings to a total of 300 to 400 hours. So you need to separate out your work in terms of the unplanned work or the tickets which will be raised with very short SLAs for 1 hour or 2 hours. And then there may be tickets which are more bigger, which probably have been pending from the previous release or a previous time frame, as the case might be. Okay. So, but I'll go to in the next slide. But the last part that I want to talk about now that I'm talking about tweaking Scrum is that retrospectives are still important. Okay. And now to answer that question, that's where now if you see the slide and how do we manage the planned and unplanned work. What you can do is, and some of you already know this concept of PPF that I've talked about during my trainings. Now, I picked the definition of PPF from past, present, future, get written. So, one part of your bucket or one part of your time during the sprint would be focused on the P1, P2 bugs which need to be solved or resolved with a very short SLAs for let's say a couple of hours or not more than 4 hours. If the team is into very highly dynamic environment, the team might almost get spend 60% time just on focusing on these. Okay. It is like a cheese block because at the start of your sprint, you will typically not know which bugs are coming or which tickets will be raised. So it is more like a cheese block you have created. So whenever a new ticket comes, it slices off some part of that cheese till the time you reach the end of the bucket. Now, if your ticket flow is still high, in spite of that, so then the product owner, who in this case may be the service manager or the team manager, can decide whether we still continue focusing on short-term SLAs or we also focus on longer-term SLAs or upgrade items and so on. But at the same time, it is very important that the team definitely spares some time focusing on future. That means analyzing the items which have been there for long in the backlog, focusing on migration upgrades, and maybe upgrading the skills of the team members. Now, this is one of the key complaints that I have heard from most of us who are in service delivery, because we are so busy with customer calls and focusing on tickets and so on that we don't really invest into upgrading the skills of our team members. We simply don't have enough time during our weekdays or work days to be able to think about anything beyond. And this is where time management and time balancing comes into picture. Right? You maybe you still spend 70 to 80% time on logging immediate tickets or logging tickets with short SLAs and so on. But it is also important that you mandatorily spend time or spare time for upgrading the skills, focusing on migration upgrade, which will help the team in a longer term. Okay. So that probably Sachin would answer your question. Now, I also posted a question from Srinivasa Moti, who talks about when we are working in service delivery, which may be shift based and so on, can we handle multiple stand-ups? So yes, we will not call it a stand-up per se, but more like a handover meeting where one shift associates can talk to other shift associates on what are the critical issues which might be pending, which may have to resolve. Okay. So they can focus from that perspective also. Now, how do you marry Scrum with some of the ITIL principles? Because some of you are already ITIL practitioners here. So let me give you 2 or 3 quick understandings where I see a very common part between ITIL concepts as well as Scrum. Now we typically have a change access board or a change control board which would decide on which should go in and so on, unless you are handling a live help desk. If you are at a L3 and L4 support, you have a change control board. Now change control board typically in this case will act more like someone who will actually feed the product backlog or the team's perpetual backlog. Okay. Obviously, you still have tickets which will be with short SLAs, but for the long-term backlog, the CAB meetings can be used to refine and groom your perpetual items. Right? Then you may or may use the concept of user stories to document if there are any long-term changes or if we talk about upgrades. So you can still use the concept of user stories. and the change manager or the shift manager or the supervisor can now act more like a scrum master. So obviously it will also mean that you need to map the responsibility of a change manager with a scrum master. But because the responsibilities may be different for different teams or different organizations, so this is something that I would leave to all of you to decide on how it works. Now, I also want to talk about two other concepts. Some of you are already aware of these, but how they are more important, and they can those practices can also be used when we are using agile practices and agile philosophy in a service delivery plan. And that concept I call as Kanban. Now, Kanban, as you are aware, is a Japanese word which means pull. So that means if your service or if your solution happens in multiple stages, it is not a push mechanism where you complete your work and pass it on to the next associate or the next set of people, but it is more like a pull mechanism. Now that means unless the last phase or the last swim lane has moved their work to done, you cannot move another item in the previous step. So just to work out this graphic, if you would see. So unless on step number N, the in progress item has moved to done, no new work item can be taken into step 1. So just a little graphic which will probably show you how how the Kanban board typically works. I have got a question from Neetu which I'll answer shortly, which is about using story points estimation service management. I'll talk about this shortly. Now, so Kanban mechanism insists on a pull mechanism where the next stage pulls the work items from the previous stage rather than it being pushed to the next stage. Now, how does it ensure we have a balanced workflow? Because Kanban is a visual tool. It clearly shows you where the workflow is getting stuck, which team member or which part of the team is overloaded, and how we can maybe reduce that workload or remove that bottleneck. And that's why one of the important metric or one of the important parts of Kanban is to limit work in progress. Because every associate, every phase of your solution would have a limited capability. Let's say there are 2 team members working on a particular part or analysis of the tickets. They only can process certain number of tickets in a day. And if you try to overload with them, obviously it will become a bottleneck. So Kanban introduces the concept of work in progress limit, where you can easily tell this is the maximum workload and this is how this particular person or the team is getting overloaded, and then the whole team can brainstorm on how we can reduce the workload on a given part of the system. So something similar to this graphic which I'm going to be pushing now, because if your swim lane is full, you cannot really add a new item unless it has been pulled forward by the next step. Now obviously during this webinar I cannot go into details of each and every part of our Kanban mechanism, but I would strongly recommend that you read more about Kanban. In fact, there are a lot of certified Kanban trainings which are not available, which are in fact hosted by my company Agile also. So I would also recommend that you attend one of those trainings and not just take it as a very simple tool, because Kanban gives you a lot of matrices, a lot of steps, a lot of flexibility into how do you plan your work. Kanban also talks about 2 important matrices. For example, the work in progress limit and the lead time. So lead time is simply when a particular work item or a ticket entered the team's backlog or the team's area and when it was completed and dispatched. So it would typically give you the life of a particular ticket or a work item. So Subhav in fact asks a question now that how do we define the work in progress limits for every step? Now, work in progress limits are defined typically by the capability of the team members or the number of team members who are working in that phase, as also looking into some of the past experience, past data on how many requests or tickets a particular associate has been able to handle on a given day or in a given time period. So work in progress limits are typically adjusted as the team soldiers on. So they will typically stabilize only after, let's say, first few weeks, where the teams can say, okay, now this is the amount of work we can handle comfortably, and this is something that it kind of makes us burn out or makes us overload. So this is something that we can decide as we go along. Now, another important metric which Kanban brings to the table is the work in progress, or number of items, which are number of tickets which are stuck or which are in a given stage. For example, if it was a pure play software development, all these colored bands you see would recommend one phase of software development. For example, requirements analysis, we are about 5 items. In the design phase, we are about 7 items. In the implementation phase, we are about 7 items or 5 items. So the work in progress would tell you the how many items are stuck on a given stage in the whole process or the whole workflow, which you can easily see through a graph. So I would recommend read more about Kanban and familiar with the different practices, different matrices which Kanban brings to the table, and then also you can use it to manage your workflow in a service delivery model. So an important aspect what I want to talk about here is to talk about lean. Now lean, as you said, the concepts lie or the origins of lean lie in the Japanese manufacturing concepts. So what does lean really bring to the table? So obviously the Japanese have been known for their quality and known for their customer focus. But at the same time, what differentiated the innovations which Japanese engineers brought vis-a-vis the Western world, vis-a-vis our European and American counterparts was affordability. Okay? So when we combine quality with affordability, you come to some of these practices which lean methods define. For example, if you talk about the basics of lean, which talks about how to create a robust system, how to focus on pull mechanisms in the Kanban that we just talked about, focusing on just-in-time delivery and not doing anything beforehand unless it is required, so that you don't waste the time that you spend there. Okay. And then also focusing on the delivery time management. So you should probably focus on some of these qualities from Lean also. So again, Ravi has asked about whether I can recommend a few good books on Kanban and Lean, which I would definitely share with you as part when I send you the mail for the recording for this. So do look out for that mail, Ravi. Now let's talk about another concept from Lean, which is Kaizen. Now Kaizen again means positive energy. So how do we eliminate waste from our system? How do we eliminate practices which prevent us from becoming more efficient and make sure the change is good? So Kaizen also is more like a PDCA cycle that you are aware of. Plan, do, check and act. So the process should not be very rigid whenever it comes to service delivery. So this is something which ITIL and COVID have been focusing on, that the process should be part of it. In fact, Sajan just now asked the question whether creating a SOP or a run book becomes part of Kaizen. In fact, I would say, Sajan, it is not just creating that SOP, but are we constantly updating it based on the current scenario, based on the challenges that our associates face every day. Now, typically, what COVID talks about is when you create that SOP, it is one process which is rigid and which everybody has to follow. So yes, we are not denying that. But if you are with a different set of customers, you're working with a different kind of geography customers, then will the same procedures apply to all geographies or all categories of customers you are handling? Maybe not. So then, like we talk about the backlog, are we continuously updating our process? Are we continuously updating our procedures so they can work with the reality on the ground, and they don't create an overhead. So Kaizen cycle talks about plan, do, check and act. So find the problem, demonstrate it and make sure it is reproducible, then acknowledge the problem and then clear it. Now I talk about a third framework today. So I talk about Scrum and Kanban and how you can use it. I also talk about Battlefield Agility, which was a new framework which we created a couple of years back. Now, Battlefield Agility does not, unlike Scrum, Battlefield Agility does not talk about fixed time boxes or sprints, but rather it focuses on features. So, and continuous delivery of features, continuous updates of your backlog based on the field inputs. So here, more focus is on delivering features and how we can collaborate with other team members so that these features, these tickets are complete. So each feature should not take more than 2 to 3 days to complete, which is our typical SLAs if you talk about long-term SLAs. And during this time, whatever needs to be done by the team, they will develop. In fact, Battlefield Agility takes a lot of inspiration from the defense forces as well as the fish philosophy, where it focuses more on a leader who is acting as a project commander, setting goals for the team, and then the team would self-manage, self-organize so that they can deliver a particular goal. So the project commander is not a command and control person, but more like a guide and mentor to the team how best we can reach that goal. Now, typically in any service delivery organization, you also have certain analysts and architects who are focused on running ahead of the team, analyzing the problems to them, breaking them into smaller chunks and so on. In Battlefield Agility, we call it the Recce team. And then you obviously have the project troops which are focused on the actual solutioning. So one of the key artifacts that Battlefield Agility has is what we call as the project roadmap. So just to quickly help you understand this, you see those little triangles, those are the tickets, those are the work items that the team wants to solve. And the attack parties would typically consist of team members with diverse skill sets so they can solve all of those features or all of those tickets depending on the area that you are working on. And then you have the analysts and the architects who are going to tell how we are going to do this, what are the difficulty levels involved, so on and so forth. So the team can draw this kind of a project roadmap and update it on a continuous basis, which will show them the current state of the tickets that they are working on, which ones are top priority, which you see them closer to the team, and which are not dependent on each other. So this is something that you can visually tag on a large board as you are solving your tickets every day. There are few rules which also Battlefield Agility brings to the table, and this is something which is very important from a service delivery perspective. The first rule that you see here is find your mate. So typically what Battlefield Agility recommends is no team member works on a particular feature alone. Okay? Unless it is super critical and something which is very small, very insignificant, then it may be okay. But the moment it goes beyond that typical SLA of 4 hours to 6 hours, involves someone with you. Now, how does that? So this takes up from the popular concept of pair programming. One, it creates a sense of ownership between the team members. Second, it makes sure that because there are two brains, two heads working, the problem is solved in a faster way. So the one person cannot think, maybe the other can help. It may also help you to train your new team members quickly. Also, it has been found by scientists. In fact, Nito asked a question according to this, that how do we define the role of two people who are working on one feature or one ticket? Now, typically, when somebody is working on one item, one of them would be the actual who is the worker, and other is the observer, or other is the reviewer. And after some time, they may switch the role. So while the other is handling the calls of the tickets, the other is observing them on whether this person is doing it right or wrong. If you are a senior and junior team members, it may be the other way around. So the senior is observing what the juniors is doing and vice versa. So this is something that you can handle continuously. Also, It has been found by research from Carnegie Mellon and the UCLA studies that the moment one person is doing more than a couple of switches, their efficiency keeps on going lower and lower. So what Battlefield Agility recommends is no troop fights more than 2 battles at a time. Also, it talks about quick success. So if you see it, what does it say? Success is the only important part. So each feature should not take more than 72 hours to resolve. Okay. And now if you see on the slide, because the criteria is success, so the team would make all out efforts to provide a solution to that ticket. It should not be hanging beyond 72 hours. So whenever any ticket, any work item is working beyond 72 hours, or it is paused, or it is not taken up, those we are calling as lost features. So in a given month, we should not have more than 2 features. Now, this principle rule ensures that the team is always focused on success. Okay. So this is all about battlefield agility. Now you can read more about battlefield agility on my blog, which again I'll send it to you as I'll cover up this. Subhav in fact asked a question here whether no troop fights more than 2 battles means any troop member should not participate in more than 2 battles. That's absolutely correct. So don't multitask too much. Maybe two tasks at a time, handling them is okay, but beyond that, if you do, it reduces the efficiency that each team member has. So, we are reaching towards the summary of this particular slide set that I was running for you. It is important that the agile teams that we work with focus on a few values, focus on a few traits. So whichever methodology, whichever mode, whichever industry you are working on, zero tolerance for negativism, both within the team and for the team. The second part that we focus on is positive feedback, recognition and reward, maybe on a weekly basis for a particular associate or a team member who really solved some very interesting problem for the customers or who handled a lot of workload. So this little feedback, recognition motivates the employees a lot. Okay. So also it is important that you don't set long-term goals only, also set immediate performance-oriented tasks and goals. So this week we will achieve this call volume, this week we will achieve this resolution value. And also set up clear responsibilities between the team members and clear rules of behavior within the team members so that you can focus on and that there's unambiguity in the way everybody is handling their roles. But establishing urgency, demanding performance creates a lot of trust both within the team members and with the team members. So this is something that I want to summarize with. And now I would be opening the floor to questions. We have about 9 minutes to go for this seminar. So if you have any more questions now on what I have talked about, please feel free to put them on the questions window. I am going to be taking up the first question from Neetu, who talks about can we use the concept of story points in a managed services environment. So Neetu, we typically I would request not to use story points for the P1, P2 or short SLA tickets, but for the longer tickets where you can actually plan for them, you may still use story points. But those we typically use when more than one team members are involved. Okay. Use the story point concept carefully because Scrum does not mandate the use of story points. Only if it is beneficial for you, then you use story points. Because even if you are using story points, the more important part is the conversation which the team has and how there is the consensus than the number of story points themselves. So focus more on collaboration. Now, to come into the next question which have been posted to me, so talking to Sachin, yes, we will be sharing the recording for this webinar, and this recording will information will be sent through our email ID trainings@agileveta.com, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel which is by the name Agileveta. Okay. So please do look out for the mail, and also you can search on YouTube for the Ajivita, and also on the Ajivita website you'll find all those on the information. Now I have a question from Rajarshi, who talks about how can we adopt agile practices in system integration projects. Though it is a little out of scope for this particular webinar, but just to answer, because system integration projects involve shorter durations, they involve a clear understanding of the requirements. Yes, you may use some agile practices, and you can still use daily standards, you can still use sprint planning within that, but try to keep the sprint duration short. Okay. In fact, Mr. Krishnamurthy has a very interesting question, which probably all of us have been facing, that when customer is not cooperating with the supplier, then what do you do? Now, this is something that most of the coaches would have struggled with this question, probably who have worked with me. Okay. But it is very important whenever you talk about a customer. In fact, I talk about a change management framework called as value-driven behavior management. Every customer, every executive, every management is looking for some kind of value, and that value is typically through the data. So you need to produce the right business case for your customers on why should they bring about this change. And typically when the customers do not cooperate with the suppliers, there is a typical trust deficit which is there. So as a practitioner, as a manager, you need to focus on how do we take away that trust deficit. Okay. Suparna has a question now on the use of lean in IT-based product company. So there are quite a few case studies available, Suparna. If you can drop us a mail, I can probably send you those case studies where we can focus on that. So Neetu again comes back to the estimation part, where she says that because Kanban and Scrum help us in focusing cross-functional challenges, do we still estimate? Yes, you can still use some traditional estimation techniques. You can still use story points depending on what your needs are. Okay? So don't use the estimation techniques which are available like yesterday's weather, triangulation, story point, and planning poker blindly. But if it is really working for you, or you can use your traditional estimation techniques also. Subhav asked a question now that Agile Principles create cross trains and multiple, which can probably handle multiple customers or support. Do we require to have any team lead to manage the team? See, the question again remains, and when we talk about Agile philosophy, as far as possible the team is self-managed. But they may still need some guidance, some mentorship, someone to help them resolve certain impediments. Now the role, you may call it team lead, you may call it the change manager, you may call it the shift manager, you may call it the scrum master, but someone who can facilitate and guide the team's journey. Maybe not from an authority perspective or telling them day to day on what you should do and what you should not do, but more as a mentor in terms of are they following the process correctly, are the customers happy, so more focusing on that. Karthik asked about whether we have any in-depth training available on battlefield agility. Yes, we do have multiple public and private classes on battlefield agility, which you can use. And in fact, as I said, more of this information is available on my blog, which I'll share the link with, because Sunil also asked similar question on battlefield agility. So please do look out for my mail. Okay. So Suresh asked a question here that if a team is doing product development and service management both, and there are urgent tickets, then the development features might be delayed. So it is important that the buckets that I talk about buckets and I talk about PPF concept, where you sort out your time into different buckets. So it is very important that the team manages and maintain those buckets in the right way, and they become sacrosanct. We just simply don't keep on breaching those buckets, because if you pop one hole in the bucket, the whole water flows. So the bucketing of your time, managing and planning for that sprint is very essential, so that it does not affect your development features. Also, it does not jeopardize the urgent tickets also. Parag has a question here who talks about how does one estimate for the tickets. Obviously, when we estimate anything, and as I said, because estimate is a guess, it is going to be a blind. If it is a blind estimate, obviously you're not going to be anywhere. So you need to have some idea about what this ticket is all about, and that's why analyzing those tickets is important. Now, is it an experienced set of team members who are estimating and analyzing this, or is it the same team member who analyzes if he has the right experience? So this is something that you would have to focus on. Next question, I am going to be now stopping taking the question because we're almost at the close of our time. Another question asks about prioritization is very important because every customer wants everything done right now, and this is where because we now asked on this question, the role of the product manager or the change manager or the team lead comes into picture. So he or she is more like a product owner for the team. What this should the team do now, and what should the team do not do now? We still need to establish the role of a product manager who's going to stabilize, or maybe the head of CAB, the change request board, who's going to be answering those kind of questions in terms of prioritization. Krishnamurthy again asked another question in terms of the contract type. So it is out of the scope of this question, but I would recommend that you go to flexiblecontracts.org, which typically helps in different kind of contracts you can use in agile engagements. Rahul asked a question whether we can use this as service transition also. Yes, you can use Scrum very well in service transition because you still have a backlog of items that you need to complete, including the trainings, setting up the server, setting up the part, and so on. So you can still use it for service transition also. In fact, Scrum has been used for multiple others beyond just IT and beyond this thing. So you can definitely use it for service transition also. I'm sure there are many more questions that we have, but I'm going to answer the last couple of questions before we close. So Arun asked a question which I definitely have to answer. Are there any changes to be considered for team member appraisals? I would say definitely yes, because typically when we talk about agile practices, it focuses on the team goals. It is not just about my individual performance, it is also about team goals. Okay, so you have to change the way the appraisals happen, change the way the team goals are set before you can say yes, we are truly being agile and not just focusing on the process of agility. Priyanka asked a question about how the formula for project estimates. I would recommend if you could go through one of our previous webinars, release planning and estimation, where we talked about this, Priyanka, which is also available on our YouTube channel and on our website, which can help you more. Okay, folks, I think we are at the end of our allotted timeline, and my colleagues are already pulling me away. So thank you very much for your time. I hope this webinar has been useful. Please do keep on looking out for more such webinars from agilevitra.com, and do join us at our stall during the upcoming Agile Tour events in India, in Hyderabad, Pune, Delhi, and Chennai. And looking forward to hear from you and also your feedback. And as I mentioned earlier, you would be receiving a mail from us shortly, and my colleagues, where the link to this webinar recording would also be available. So thank you very much. Have a nice time ahead, and hope this webinar is useful. Thank you so much.